There's a line that keeps showing up in the oldest agricultural texts ever recovered from Southeast Asia. Researchers translate it differently every time. Some call it a planting record, others call it a prayer. A few have quietly suggested it might be both. Rice remembers everything. Somewhere between the terraced mountains of the Cordillera and the flooded plains of the Cagayan Valley, a group of people figured out how to feed the world. They didn't announce it. They didn't carve their names into stone tablets for future archaeologists to find. They worked the land, season after season, generation after generation, until the grain itself became something new. Something that had never existed before them. You probably learned in school that rice cultivation started in China, the Yangtze River Basin, around 7,000 to 9,000 years ago. That's the standard version. The one that fills textbooks from Manila to Berlin to São Paulo, tidy, authoritative. Stamped with decades of peer-reviewed approval. Here's where the story gets complicated. Archaeobotanists, the people who study ancient plant remains, have been quietly digging up evidence across the Philippine archipelago for decades. Really decades. What they keep finding doesn't fit the official timeline. Carbonized rice grains, pollen residue, agricultural tool fragments, irrigation channels carved into ease that by the accepted chronology shouldn't exist yet. The dating on some of these sites pushes back cultivation records in the Philippines to eons that predate what many Western institutions recognize as established rice agriculture in the region. To be honest, some researchers argue the gap isn't a few centuries. It's closer to 3,000 years of agricultural knowledge that never made it into the dominant historical narrative. That number deserves to sit for a moment. 3,000 years. That's roughly the distance between ancient Rome and your morning coffee. Look, the Cordillera rice terraces of the Ifugao people are one of the most photographed UNESCO World Heritage Sites in existence. Tourists post them constantly. Travel magazines call them the eighth wonder of the world, though nobody can quite pin down who first said that. The terraces are beautiful, yes, stunningly, almost painfully beautiful. But beauty isn't the point. All right, the engineering is the point. Ifugao communities built those terraces without metal tools, without external technical assistance, and without any blueprint borrowed from outside the archipelago. The irrigation system they developed moves water through a complex network of channels, dikes, and controlled flooding that modern hydrologists still study with open respect. This didn't appear overnight. This took centuries of refined agricultural knowledge to develop. Centuries of knowing exactly what rice needs, how much water, what soil composition, which elevation produces which grain density. You can't build something like that unless you've been growing rice for a very long time. On the other hand, the Ifugao oral tradition places the beginning of their agricultural practice so far back that most Western scholars have historically waved it off as mythology. Convenient that. An ancient civilization describes its own history, and outsiders decide its legend. The same outsiders who built their careers on the assumption that agricultural innovation flowed primarily from China into the rest of Asia. There's a pattern here worth noticing, but there's a detail. The Austronesian migration, the population movement that spread languages and cultures across Southeast Asia, Oceania, and the Pacific, originated in the Taiwan-Philippines region. Linguists have established this. Geneticists have confirmed it. The people who eventually settled half the Pacific Ocean started somewhere in or near the Philippine archipelago. They carried plants with them. They carried cultivation techniques. They carried the knowledge of how to make a feed a community. Rice was part of that package. Phytolith analysis, the study of microscopic plant silica that survives in soil long after the plant itself has vanished, has produced some of the most inconvenient data in Southeast Asian archaeology. Filipino soil samples from sites in Mindanao and the Cagayan Valley have shown evidence of intensive rice cultivation that doesn't match the timeline drawn by institutions that largely built their frameworks before Filipino archaeologists had significant funding or international platform. Stop. Think about what that means structurally. The people doing the digging for most of the 20th century were not Filipino researchers. The people setting the publication agenda, the people deciding which findings got international attention, operated from institutions in Europe, the United States, and China. Data found in Philippine soil got filtered through frameworks built elsewhere, for purposes built elsewhere. Filipino archaeologist Armand Salvador Mijares has spent years pushing back against this. His excavations in the Cagayan Valley have produced findings that consistently challenge the accepted narrative of regional prehistory. His team's work on Callao Cave alone rewrote how researchers understand human presence in the archipelago. The man operates with rigorous methodology and deep knowledge of his predecessors had access to for decades and chose to overlook. He's not alone. A generation of Filipino scholars has rebuilt this field from the inside. Now, about Beijing. The phrase classified harvest records attracts a lot of dramatic internet energy. Most of it goes nowhere useful. Story is less cinematic and more troubling than any conspiracy theory could manufacture. Chinese agricultural institutions have produced a substantial body of research establishing China as the origin point of rice domestication. Oryza sativa, the species that feeds most of humanity, the genetic fingerprints of its earliest domestication. These studies are real. The scholarship is legitimate. The Yangtze Basin findings are genuine. Nobody disputes that Chinese rice cultivation is extraordinarily old. Wait a second. The dispute is about exclusivity. The dispute is about who gets to claim the origin story. Several Chinese research institutions in the 1990s and early 2000s produced reports on Southeast Asian rice genetics that Philippine scholars argued presented incomplete data. Not fabricated, incomplete. The distinction matters. Incomplete in ways that happen to support a singular origin narrative. Some findings from Philippine archaeological sites received minimal citation. But the Spanish friars who documented these communities in the 16th and 17th centuries wrote about rice cultivation practices with such established complexity that the friars assumed, incorrectly, that the techniques must have come from somewhere else. From China, probably, they reasoned, from somewhere more civilized. That assumption lodged itself in the historical record. It stayed there for 300 years. Filipino historians spent generations working against that embedded assumption, trying to demonstrate that the sophistication of indigenous Philippine agriculture was internally developed, not imported. Each generation of Filipino scholars made progress. Each generation also faced the structural reality that international recognition for Southeast Asian archaeological findings lags significantly behind findings from East Asia in the Mediterranean. By the way, the tide has shifted. Recent decades have seen Filipino researchers publish in major international venues, collaborate with genetic laboratories around the world, and build the evidentiary case that the Philippine archipelago represents one of humanity's significant agricultural development zones. The Cordillera Terraces, the seed diversity of indigenous communities, the soil records from Cagayan and Mindanao, the genetic markers in Philippine wild rice populations. Taken together, these tell a story that one geographic origin point cannot fully contain. Rice didn't come from China and spread outward like a gift given downward. Rice emerged in multiple places, from multiple peoples, through multiple generations of human ingenuity, working on the same fundamental challenge. How do you feed everyone when the season changes? Think about it. The Filipinos who answered that question didn't write academic papers. They built terraces into mountainsides that have outlasted empires. They maintained seed varieties that modern agricultural scientists now treat as irreplaceable genetic resources. They developed irrigation systems that still function 2,000 years after their construction. All right, the harvest records aren't in Beijing. They're in the terraces. They're in the seeds. They're in the soil of a nation that fed itself long before anyone came to tell it how. Stop, Rice remembers. And sometimes, so do the mountains.